And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the big issues that must be looked at in depth. Nothing is off the table and nobody will be cancelled for saying exactly what they think. Keeping me company today is the journalist and commentator George Bijinski, and here's what we've got coming up on the show. Is Europe on the eve of war? With reports Russia could begin airstrikes on Ukraine at 3 in the morning, the German Chancellor is in Moscow for a last-ditch diplomatic effort. But is the nation Kremlin compromised, and does this spell appeasement? A dangerous decadence. The words of Conservative Party co-chairman Oliver Dowden on the woke groupthink capturing the West. But how much of a threat do neoliberal tensions actually pose? And is the UK government to blame? And those trucker protests. As the Canadian Prime Minister invokes emergency powers used only once before in his nation's history, we ask what has gone wrong with our Commonwealth cousins when it comes to COVID. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. But what do you need to talk about? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. But first, it's time for GB News headlines with Rosie. Good afternoon. It's coming up to 2 minutes past 2. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Now, the NATO Secretary-General says there hasn't been any evidence of a withdrawal by Russian forces close to the Ukrainian border. Well, it's after the Russian Defence Ministry says they're returning some troops after completing what they're calling training exercises. However, the head of NATO says there is some room for cautious optimism after there were signs from Moscow that diplomacy should continue.
We have not seen any de-escalation on the ground, not seen any signs of reduced Russian military presence on the borders of Ukraine. But we will continue to monitor and to follow closely what Russia is doing.
In the UK, following an emergency COBRA meeting, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said that the intelligence is still concerning. But he added some diplomatic channels are open with Russia.
The intelligence that we're seeing today is still not encouraging. We've got Russian field hospitals being constructed near the border with Ukraine in Belarus for only can be construed as a preparation for an invasion. You've got more battalion tactical groups actually being brought closer to the border with Ukraine, according to the intelligence that we're seeing. So mixed signals, I think, at the moment.
People in Wales will receive extra support to help manage the cost of living crisis. The Welsh Government says they're going above and beyond by offering a package including a £150 cost of living payment and an extra £200 for low-income households next winter. The number of UK workers in formal employment rose again at the beginning of this year. The Office for National Statistics said the number of UK workers in formal employment rose by 108,000 between December and January. Salaries rose in the last quarter, but continued to lag behind inflation, which is at a near 30-year high. Northern Ireland's remaining coronavirus restrictions will be lifted today and replaced instead by guidance. The rules, therefore, requiring face masks in public places and the need to show COVID certificates for nightclubs will be dropped.
Immigration rules on care worker jobs have been relaxed. The profession of care worker has now been added to the government's list of occupation shortages. This is designed to help migrants get work visas to fill jobs where there are significant staffing gaps. The social care sector has struggled to attract and retain staff. World tennis star Novak Djokovic says he will not defend his Wimbledon or French Open titles if the tournaments require mandatory vaccination for competitors. Speaking to the BBC, he said it was a price he was willing to pay and that he prioritised what he puts in his body over a trophy. The 34-year-old, who isn't vaccinated against COVID-19, distanced himself, though, from the anti-vax movement. And he said he'd had vaccinations as a child. The government has outlined more details over plans to protect leaseholders from cladding costs. They want developers and manufacturers to pay for replacing dangerous cladding in order to protect renters. If they don't address and pay to rectify safety issues, the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities say they could be prevented from building in the future. A study has found potentially toxic levels of pharmaceutical drugs in a quarter of the rivers across the world. The National Academy of Sciences surveyed more than 1,000 sites, including the Thames in London and the Amazon in Brazil. The research measured the presence of 61 pharmaceuticals that pose a risk to freshwater habitats and wildlife. Bristol Zoo Gardens in Clifton will shut its doors for good in September, having been open since 1836. They've been struggling with a lack of visitors over recent years. All of the animals are going to move to a wildlife park in South Gloucestershire. Over the years, it's helped save 175 species from extinction through its conservation programmes. 16-year-old Mac Rutherford is aiming to become the youngest man to fly solo around the world. But reaching new heights appears to be a family trait. His sister Zara set the record as the youngest woman to fly on her own last month. Max says he's not trying to get one up on her and says she's an inspiration. You're up to date now on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
Peace for our time. The words of Chamberlain clutching the Munich Agreement after meeting Hitler in 1938, reassuring Europe that the German Führer would restrain himself, having been granted concessions from European leaders. Less than a year later, Europe was at war. By the time you wake up tomorrow, Russia may have invaded Ukraine. But there is one last roll of the diplomatic dice, and it will poignantly be cast by Germany. Germany, accused by the Ukrainian ambassador in Berlin of breaking sanctions to supply materials that could have been used to build the very weapons that could strike Kiev. Germany, who allegedly blocked airspace to UK aircraft delivering defence supplies to Ukraine. Germany, who reportedly demanded Lithuania not supply Kiev with arms and sent but a few thousand helmets instead. Germany, who has cast doubts on sanctions, concerned at the exposure of European banks to the ruble, blocking proposals to ban Russia from the globe's largest currency transit system. Germany, whose former Chancellor, Gerhard Schroeder, celebrated his 70th birthday with Putin as guest of honour and partnered with the Kremlin over the gas supply at the root of Europe's fractured response. The Nord Stream managing director, himself a former Stasi spy. Germany, who seemingly has enough compromat to fill a Cold War film franchise. Well, today, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is meeting Putin in Moscow, right now, in fact, possibly on the eve of war. Germany has greater leverage than any other nation. But at what cost? Yes, Germany may hold cards, but how many spell appeasement? Well, joining me now is Sir Paul Lever, former chairman of the Joint Intelligence Committee and former British ambassador to Germany. Sir Paul, it's fantastic to have you on the programme. I mean, it's clear to me that Germany has a very influential role to play in a potential diplomatic solution to ongoing tensions and escalations of a crisis regarding Russia and Ukraine. But is there a risk here that Germany is potentially too Kremlin adjacent?
Good afternoon. Good to be with you. Yes, Germany is often accused of being too soft on Russia. And it's true that historically Germany has always had a preference for negotiating and talking, even when the prospects of talking don't seem to be very optimistic. I think in this case, the present German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is rather new. He's only been in office since December. Foreign affairs are not his bag, as it were. He's concerned mostly with economics and finance. He's been rather slow to set out a position. He's been accused in his own country of being the invisible chancellor. And some of the things that Germany has done or not done, I think, have been disappointing. Not selling weapons themselves to Ukraine on the grounds that they have a policy of not supplying weapons to conflict regions. Well, it doesn't stop them selling an awful lot to the Middle East. And to extend that to preventing Estonia from selling on to Ukraine some artillery pieces that it bought from Germany in the 1990s, I think that seems to many people to be taking it all a bit too far. That said, Germany has in the past, under President Kohl, and even paradoxically, Chancellor Kohl, and even paradoxically under Chancellor Schröder, it has been willing to take tough decisions against Russian interests, stationing nuclear weapons in the 1980s, taking part in NATO operations in Kosovo in the 90s. So it's not the case that they always shy away, but I think the issue that has attracted most concern is their unwillingness now to come out and say openly, if Russia invades Ukraine, or more accurately, invades more of Ukraine, then they will shut the Nord Stream pipeline.
Is the risk not possible that, as Scholz and Putin are meeting at this very moment, the negotiations around that famously large table are going to be on the lines of, well, listen, please don't invade Ukraine, and in return we'll let you build Nord Stream 2. We'll agree to removing some NATO troops from areas that you say. And if that is the result, and it does actually stop us from going over the precipice when it comes to conflict, is that not essentially appeasing a saber-rattling warmonger?
Well, it would be if it went too far. I mean, on Nord Stream, Nord Stream 2 is actually built and it's almost ready to be licensed and to start operating. I think if there's no invasion of Ukraine, it probably will go ahead. It's controversial in Germany, but this present government has indicated that it will put it into operation. Assuming that there's no further hostilities in Ukraine. I don't think Germany can itself deliver on its own on NATO arrangements in Central and Eastern Europe. And I don't think it would try to do so. I don't believe that NATO will be willing to change its military dispositions in the Baltic states, in Poland, in Romania and Bulgaria. They're not remotely threatening to Russia. They are purely defensive in character, and the Russians know it. Russia is worried about the political damage to its prestige of the fact that these countries, some of whom used to be part of the old Soviet Union, have, as soon as they became free, opted to align themselves with the democratic West. I don't think Germany would try to do anything to call that into question or to suggest that perhaps they should leave NATO, having already joined it. But I think it's the economic area where the Germans perhaps could have been more robust than they have been.
And in terms of, I mean, let's look at things like Nord Stream 2. You say that that's, basically ready for the tap to be turned on. We know that Germany, especially, but a lot of the continent of Europe and in part the UK, is dependent on gas from Russia. But does that not leave us continually exposed to the sort of manipulations from Russia that we're seeing played out?
Yes, it does. Ironically, the whole reason for building Nord Stream, both the first Nord Stream pipeline and the second one, was to avoid what you rightly termed Russian manipulation. So long as the gas came through pipelines that went through Poland and through Ukraine, Poland and Ukraine could hold it hostage or delay it for reasons relating to their own national interest. And Ukraine occasionally did so. And it was to have a direct link between Russia and Germany that Nord Stream was built in the first place. Whether it was warranted or not, you can argue about. It's not, of course, just Germany that is highly dependent on Russia for gas and oil. Many countries in Central and Eastern Europe, and indeed some in Western Europe, are as well. But Germany is, of course, the biggest, and it's access to the German market that is the most important for Russia. So there would be penalties if there were any measures to limit the flow of Russian gas. The penalties would hit some countries in Western Europe as well as Russia itself. That said, there are alternative sources of gas in the world.
So, Paul, it's been fascinating, absolutely fascinating, having your insights on the eve of, well, what could turn into conflicts. We don't know yet. That's Sir Paul Lever, who used to be head of the Joint Intelligence Committee and former British ambassador to Russia. So who better to talk about this meeting that we can see pictures of right now taking place as I broadcast between Chancellor Scholz of Germany and President Putin of Russia. They're about to be holding a press conference together. Let's find out later in the day whether there's some sort of diplomatic solution found. Well, meanwhile, here in the UK, the Prime Minister has said today there are signs of openness to diplomacy from Russia, but the intelligence the government is seeing on Russia and Ukraine is not encouraging. Boris Johnson spoke to reporters earlier.
That's why it's so important, Joe, that we support Ukraine, and that we show that we have a package of tough, very, very tough economic sanctions ready to go, and that we support Ukraine militarily in the way that we are. The UK has been out in the front in delivering defensive but lethal military aid in the form of the anti-tank weapons, as well as the training that we've done over many, many years. The UK has been giving a lot of support to Ukraine. Final thing I would mention, this is a very difficult decision that we've just taken, and that is to keep our embassy going in Kiev and to continue to ask Melinda Simmons, our fantastic ambassador, to do what she's doing. Now, that's a balanced decision. We have to face the fact that there is a risk, and we'll keep it under constant review. But one of the things we want to do is to show the UK's continued support for Ukraine, for stability in Ukraine. And I believe that keeping our embassy going for as long as possible is an important symbol.
Well, let's bring in my studio guest today, George Brzezinski, who's a Polish journalist and political commentator. It's interesting, isn't it, when you look at these fracture lines running through Europe, and Poland's position in this is interesting as well. It seems to me that Poland rather misses having the UK around the table in the EU at least, and when it comes to what's going on, would probably more rather see the US-UK strong talk against Russia taking place and what could be a sort of German softly approach.
Absolutely. So Sir Paul Lever said that Germany has a preference for negotiations. I think that Germany has a preference for appeasement, and that's potentially very worrying. So not just Poland, but many countries of Central and Eastern Europe, including Ukraine, are very worried that Chancellor Scholz, by going to Moscow, will simply seek to not just de-escalate the conflict and show that unity of the West in terms of supporting Ukraine, but will try to find the best business deal for the two countries. It seems very strange that Germany, one of the most important countries in Europe and in the world, is doing so much business with Russia while there is such a conflict going on. Nord Stream 2 is not just about buying gas and about money. It's a very strong, powerful weapon, energy weapon in the hands of Russia. And perhaps German leaders think that they will be part of that gas empire in Europe. But they will also be on the receiving end, meaning that Russians, whenever they want to, they will be able to influence Germany and the whole of Europe. That's why this strong support and very meaningful action from Boris Johnson, from the UK government, US as well to a large extent, of support to the countries around Russia at the moment has been incredibly appreciated. And we're very glad that UK, despite leaving the European Union, is still very visible, actually is at the forefront of supporting peace and stability in Europe.
Yeah, well, we can see those pictures now still taking place. There's German Chancellor Olaf Scholz delivering his press conference, and we'll get information on what he said as soon as we get a translation on that. But, George, I'm going to continue this conversation with you. I mean, when it comes to Poland's position here in the West or in the UK, we can speculate of what Putin might be planning to do. Intelligence reports that Russia could be ready to strike as early as 3 o'clock this morning, Ukrainian time. But, I mean, while we might speculate of what the repercussions would be for the UK, evidently tensions are a lot higher in Poland, where there's a very real and present threat from Russia.
Yes, absolutely. Although I do think that Putin is mostly flexing his muscles, I do not see it being in his interest to have a full-scale attack on Ukraine and then occupying that country. Ukraine has over 200,000 soldiers, over 150,000 paramilitary groups, which are highly nationalistic. They will not just give away their weapons and surrender. They will be fighting. So taking over Ukraine for Russia is a bit like an Afghanistan or Iraq. It's a battle that would be enormously costly and would take tens of, if not hundreds of thousands of lives. At the same time, I do believe that Russia is trying to threaten Ukraine. And the reason for that is they want to recreate that table, whether it's very long or shorter, but that Cold War table where Russia was treated equally to the US and they sat down and they made all those decisions in the world. Russia is not in that position anymore. It's China that's growing to be one of the most powerful. It already is one of the most powerful countries, but Russia still has an army, still has a lot of intelligent people in their government, and they're just trying to play that chess game that they're still seen as very important. And it seems that they are, to some extent, winning. I actually think it's both a win-win situation now, because the West can show they pushed away some of the Russian soldiers. But Russia has also seen European leaders coming to Moscow, meeting Putin, trying to find those solutions. Russia is seen as the kingmaker again. So they have won their very risky game of threatening Ukraine, although they haven't won it fully, because what they wanted to do is push NATO away and have guarantees that Ukraine would not join NATO. Those guarantees are not on the table. So still a lot can happen, and we should be very careful and wary.
Well, meanwhile, Russian critics of President Putin claim the trial of one of his fierce opponents is being held while attention is drawn away by the Ukraine crisis. Alexei Navalny is on trial in prison for embezzlement. Well, let's get the latest from Moscow Times reporter Jake Cordell. Jake, fantastic to have you back on the programme. Can you just refresh our viewers' memories of Alexei Navalny and why this trial is so important potentially to the West and is not particularly being covered?
Yeah, Alexei Navalny is the leading opposition figure here in Russia, in a country where opposition forces and opposition politicians are routinely squashed and repressed and oppressed by the Kremlin. He was, if you remember, poisoned during a campaigning trip almost 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. He was then had to be medically evacuated to Germany. And when he returned, he was arrested for violating parole conditions on what many campaigners say are trumped up charges. And he's now in prison. This new trial on new charges of fraud, which his supporters, human rights groups, Amnesty International have called a sham, is going on while he's already in prison. And the idea is that the Kremlin wants to keep him there as long as it possibly can.
I mean, we can see pictures right now of Vladimir Putin holding a press conference with Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor. There have been US intelligence reports that they believe that Russia could well be planning to launch an attack in the early hours of tomorrow morning. Meanwhile, Russia has blamed the West for escalating tensions. There's been a lot of mixed messaging about whether troops are being withdrawn, and then Russia saying, no, they're not. They're on exercise missions and they're coming back. I mean, in Russia, what is the perception there? Do you think that Putin is poised to strike?
Well, in Russia today, we've seen big talk about de-escalation. We saw the announcement that troops are being pulled back from the border, they're going home. We saw comments from top diplomats that a deal is possible. Russian officials said that what the US proposed in terms of counter proposals on missile treaties and stuff, that could be a goer for Moscow. So the talk now and what's coming out of that press conference that's ongoing now is a very de-escalatory tone from Russia. And analysts here in Moscow are kind of feel like the deal may be already closed on this, that we could have stepped back from the brink. And that contrasts with the intelligence reports that are coming from the West. We have to point out that contrast has been there all along. Russia has been saying, we're not going to go to war, these are just military exercises. And the West has been saying, well, then you need to show it up by removing those troops. So the proof will be over the next few hours and days, how many of those troops come back, where do they go to, how far away from the border are they going?
I mean, if a deal has indeed been closed, and that is what we're seeing pictures of right now, what is likely to feature in that deal? Does it amount to essentially appeasement? Is it rewarding Vladimir Putin for saber-rattling and threatening a sovereign nation? And you know, do we think that that's going to, I mean, is he going to leave this without a scalp?
Well, I don't think there's going to be any kind of written deal or proposal put on the table. That isn't really how this process has gone, and that isn't why the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is in Germany. He's in Germany to show his solidarity with Europe and try and push back against Russia. As you say, Germany's been a bit equivocal throughout this process, so he'll be looking to set out where Germany stands. From the Russian side, they haven't proposed, they haven't said they've accepted any new deal or that any deal has been done. They've just said that at the moment they're willing to consider, and they see the US proposals, which are largely around kind of second-tier issues like missile placement in Eastern Europe. They said that could be a goer, but Moscow is presenting this de-escalation as a unilateral measure on Russia's behalf. Now, yes, the question remains, does this settle the issue? Probably not. And how long does this issue go on for? Ukraine is a really key part of Russia's national identity, and it's really important for Vladimir Putin personally. So is he just going to step back from the brink and accept that he didn't get all that he wanted, or is he just preparing for another escalation in the future?
Yeah, good question. Thank you so much, Jake Cordell, who's a reporter for the Moscow Times, giving us a little update on what's going on the ground in Russia as we see pictures still of that joint press conference between German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Russian President Vladimir Putin. You're with GB News on TV and radio. After the break, no plans to name any individuals fined over Partygate. Is that fair?
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel. If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon. It's just coming up to 2:30. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Now, President Putin says he does not want a war in Europe amid increasing tensions along the Ukrainian border. As we can see now, he's currently speaking in Moscow alongside the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Now, earlier today, the NATO Secretary-General says there hasn't been any evidence of a withdrawal by Russian forces close to the Ukrainian border. That's despite the Russian Defense Ministry saying they're returning some troops. The number of UK workers in formal employment rose again at the beginning of this year. The Office for National Statistics said the number of UK workers in formal employment climbed by 108,000 between December and January. Salaries rose in the last quarter of the year, but continue to lag behind inflation, which is at a near 30-year high. World tennis star Novak Djokovic says he will not defend his Wimbledon or French Open titles if the tournaments require mandatory vaccination for competitors. Speaking to the BBC, he said it was a price he was willing to pay and that he prioritised what he puts into his body over a trophy. Northern Ireland's remaining coronavirus restrictions will be lifted and replaced instead by guidance today. The rules requiring face masks in public places and the need to show COVID certificates for nightclubs will be dropped. The country's health minister will make an order revoking the rules later today. 16-year-old Matt Rutherford is aiming to become the youngest man to fly solo around the world. Reaching new heights appears to be a family trait. His sister Zara set the record as the youngest woman to fly on her own last month. You're up to date now here on GB News. We'll keep you across, of course, many developing stories today, particularly that in Russia and Ukraine. But you are up to date here on TV, online and DAB+ radio. Now let's go back to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
Well, as we wait for more news to emanate from that press conference between Olaf Scholz and Vladimir Putin in Moscow, we'll move on to our second story of the day. Blink, and you would have missed it. But the Met Police slipped out a briefing yesterday to the civil service, informing them that the long-awaited Partygate report would detail how many fines are levied against attendees, but critically, it will not name the recipients. Critically, because Boris Johnson has continued to rebuff allegations of impropriety by stating he knew not of the nature of the parties, was barely in attendance, and could easily be excused for mistaking them for work events. Critically, because the Prime Minister's future hangs by the delicate thread of whether or not he, personally, as the highest office in the land, broke the very laws he imposed. Information we now may never know, enabling the Met Police to neatly wrap up their investigation by claiming wrongs have been righted, while the Prime Minister's own culpability is left out of the frame. Well, joining me now is the political editor of the Mirror newspaper, Nigel Nelson. Nigel, does this strike you as an interesting turn of events, the fact that you have here the Met Police saying, yes, we'll let the civil service know how many fines are issued, but we will not be naming who gets them?
Well, I think there's only one name we're really interested in, and that's Boris Johnson. And what Number 10 have said is that because of the public interest in this case, they will tell us if the Prime Minister gets a fixed penalty notice. That obviously will then decide his future, because at the moment, the letters of no confidence from Tory MPs are in abeyance while the police complete their investigation. once we know whether or not that Boris Johnson has been fined the £100 or maybe more, it depends on how many breaches the police find, then those letters may start coming back in again. And of course, his whole future is back into question.
And what now of the Sue Gray report? Because there might be people out there who think that perhaps the Met Police report could be construed as a bit of a stitch-up. But we have always been told that once the Met Police have completed their work, that we will see the unredacted Gray report. How likely do you think that is?
I think very likely. I don't think there's any way that the Sue Gray report can be suppressed for much longer. So once the police have completed their investigation, then I think we'll see the entire report from Sue Gray. The question then is what Tory MPs do about it. That we know of 15 letters that have gone in already. Could be a lot higher, it could be 30 or 40. On the basis of that, other Tory MPs who've held back will decide whether or not to put in letters of no confidence. Then the big shift will be to that vote taking place. And of course, it's by no means certain that Boris Johnson wouldn't win that. What he needs is 180 of his MPs to back him, and he stays in place for another year.
Thank you ever so much. Nigel Nelson, political editor of The Mirror. Fascinating events continuing to unfold when it comes to Partygate. Let's go back to our top story, because while the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Vladimir Putin continue their press conference in Moscow, we can give you a few lines taken from that. The German Chancellor is highlighting that there needs to be open and honest dialogue, and actually says that his countries are very closely linked. But then Putin has alleged that there's been genocide going on in the Donbass. Let's go back to George Brzezinski. Now, let's look at some of those comments that are coming out of the press conference. I mean, Germany admitting there that the countries are very closely economically tied. We've talked about that. But Putin now alleging that there have been human rights atrocities in Ukraine. Now, we know that Russia, there was intelligence leaks from the US suggesting that Russia was going to create videos, mock things up, showing things like human rights violations taking place in the Donbass as precursor to potentially an incursion. Do you think this is Putin climbing down and actually trying to find a way of skulking back to the Kremlin with his pride intact?
Very possibly. This is exactly what he does very successfully often. It makes no sense for Ukrainians to be attacking the Russian separatists at the moment, or the parts that Ukraine doesn't control in Donetsk, Lugansk, in the eastern of Ukraine. What one always has to ask whenever discussing politics, who benefits? So if there was an order now for Ukrainians to just start throwing rockets, attacking eastern Ukraine, that just completely doesn't make sense. It would play for Putin, and it would give him better cause, and he could be even stronger in his negotiations with the West right now. So yes, I wouldn't be surprised if this was just more of negotiations. We can possibly just see 1 or 2 layers of the negotiations, but there must be 5 or 10 other ones that we do not notice. So what Russia wants to do next is to give some sort of independence to those people's republics, as they call them, the parts of Ukraine that are not fully controlled by Ukraine, and they're a little bit of a legal limbo because it's the Russian separatists that control them. So by saying that there is a genocide, Mr. Putin is probably just trying to show that these areas need to be protected. How? Of course, by Russia. So this will be certainly another topic between the world leaders. What should be done with those 2 regions? And it's also difficult for Ukraine to say, because it should be their country. It is part of their country, yet they're not fully controlling it. So it's a tough one for the Ukrainians as well.
George, thank you. Well, you are with GB News on TV and DAB radio. We're going to try and stay across that press conference taking place in Moscow and give you the latest lines. Also, after the break, the Tory party chairman says woke ideology is taking over our institutions and even poses a threat to the West. We'll unpick what he's had to say. See you shortly.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, the first Conservative Party chairman to address America in over 2 decades delivered an excoriating message at a top Washington think tank. The West is committing an act of mass self-harm through the decadent ideology of woke culture. Those are the words of Oliver Dowden at the Heritage Foundation. That deafening culture wars lead to ugly societal divisions is hard to deny. That they create a dangerous distraction from greater challenges is impossible to disagree with. That the perversely named liberal culture is tearing apart the values that held Western society together, causing almost mass psychological hysteria, is tragically acute to any of us who lament the loss of common sense and community. But Oliver Dowden shied away from questions over whether the government's zealous net zero strategy, playing into the hands of bad actors in Russia, the Middle East and China, amounted to the same painful woke psychodrama that he called dangerous. Well, let's cross to the US and talk to the host of that speech at the Heritage Foundation, Niall Gardner. Niall, fantastic to have you on the programme. I mean, he hit all the right sound bites, didn't he? But there seems to be a little bit of myopia when it comes to potentially the role that policy making is having into what he calls the dangerous decadence of woke ideology.
Well, thanks for having me on the show, Alex. And I had the pleasure yesterday of hosting Oliver Dowden, the chairman of the Conservative Party, for the first speech by a Conservative Party chairman in 2 decades here in Washington. And it was a very robust address, actually. The speech was entitled Defeating, Cancel Culture. And I think it was the strongest statement yet that we've seen from the British Conservative Party against this extremely dangerous woke ideology. And I think that, his speech, I agreed with every word of it. I mean, it was a speech that my former boss, Margaret Thatcher, would have loved. And he called on the British people, the American people, to really take tremendous pride in their own history and in their past, to stand up for the great principles of freedom and liberty that make our great nations the beating heart of the free world. And so this was a powerful address against the far left woke ideology that is poisoning, I think, a lot of minds on both sides of the Atlantic. And also, I think, very refreshingly as well, in the Q&A that I had with Oliver Dowden straight after his remarks, he did speak about the need for the Conservative Party to embrace a policy of low taxes, a limited government, in the aftermath of the pandemic. And he did speak about a return to the Thatcherite roots for the Conservative Party. And so this was very encouraging to hear, because I think we have to see, strong British leadership in favour of limited government, in favour of free markets, in favour of low taxes. And it's certainly my own hope, of course, that the Conservatives really return to the ideals and principles of Thatcherism, which turned Britain from the sick man of Europe into the 1970s into a great global force to be reckoned with on the world stage.
Isn't the problem here that Oliver Dowden might have crossed the pond and said things as music to the ears of people like you and I? But back home, the Prime Minister can't actually say who has a cervix. You've got Stonewall capturing public bodies and almost imposing their radical ideologies by the back door. You've got COP26 and the policies that have emanated from that, the most strident and some might say zealous net zero policies in the West. That means we continue to be bound to Chinese manufacturing might and Russian energy games. I mean, it's nice that he's talking the talk, but it doesn't seem to me that this is indicating a particular turning point when it comes to the UK government.
Well, those are all very good points, Alex, and I think there was a lot of great good in this speech, especially in terms of confronting cancel culture, confronting critical race theory, for example, and also, of course, defending the right of freedom of speech on campuses. At the same time, it's certainly my view, and I think that you share this, Alex, that that the Conservative government has to stand up for conservative principles. That includes as well on the transgender issue as well, and so many areas as well. I think that the Conservative government needs to take a far stronger conservative line, and I heartily agree with that. Also, with regard to the the net zero policies, I do think they are hugely expensive for the British economy, for the British people. They have also resulted in tax rises, and we need to see free market solutions in place, pro-free market policies, rather than big government policies. So, I very much agree that the Conservatives have to do a lot more in terms of advancing real Thatcherite, limited government, low tax policies, and I do have some great concerns actually about the sort of net zero agenda and the huge costs that this agenda places upon the shoulders of the tax-paying British people. So there really needs to be a big reassessment of all of this.
Fantastic to have you on the programme once again. That's Niall Gardner from the Heritage Foundation in Washington, DC, who, of course, hosted Oliver Dowden yesterday. Well, joining me now is political commentator Emma Webb. Strong words from Oliver Dowden. Do they ring true to you, or is this perhaps a nice foreign jolly where he can say the right things, talk the talk, when his party's not prepared to walk the walk?
Well, he's absolutely saying all of the right things. I think we can agree there that this is a breath of fresh air, and how robust it was. Talk of, using words like decadent and referring to woke ideology as being a luxury, because that really is what it is. And I think in that respect, he's right. And that's definitely borne out by the facts. There are many examples of that. But you're also absolutely right there that we need to see the Conservative Party walking the walk. If we look only, in the last week or so, there was news of on the 8th of February, the military having something that was nicknamed Operation Teamwork. And this was an inclusion and culture training day, where they stopped what they described as all non-essential activity, though I'm not sure exactly what it means to suggest that there is any activity, any work that the army are doing at this time that is non-essential. But apparently they suspended work in order to have this culture and inclusion training day. And so you're absolutely right. We've seen it in not only in the Ministry of Justice, but also in many other government departments, all of this discussion around pronouns. And I think Oliver Dowden is absolutely right. This is decadent. And the decadence, the luxury of it, does pose a threat to the West, because it really is, as the old phrase says, fiddling while Rome burns. And I think that it's really important that he's brought that to our attention, particularly with rising tensions in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, but also in relation to China as well. So I think it's really important that the Conservatives step up their game and actually show that they can walk the walk, and that this isn't just one fantastic, I have to say, fantastic speech by Oliver Dowden to an American audience. I think they need to show that this can actually be borne out, and that they can really stand up to what Oliver Dowden has said there, including what he said about us having a smaller state and lower taxes. I think that's something that the Conservative Party really sort of need to nail their colours to that mast and show that they can be a Conservative government, because they haven't seemed to be one for quite a while now.
Emma, fantastic speaking to you as always. Emma Webb. It's interesting, isn't it? Do you ever wonder how many foreign bots, probably in Russia and China, are there pouring petrol on some of those flames when it comes to the culture wars to divide our society? Well, let's return to the big story this hour, and that is, of course, the visit of German Chancellor Olaf Scholz to Moscow for talks with President of Russia, Vladimir Putin. Well, my studio guest is the political commentator George Brzezinski, and he's been watching carefully as that press conference has been taking place. Now, it seems to me, from what I've seen so far of that press conference, that there's a bit of a pally-pally handshake going on right now between Russia and Germany, which is leading some people to say, well, were Russia's troops on the border of Ukraine, a hugely theatrical bluff all along, and as a result, what is Putin getting from this?
Yes, what is Putin getting from this is a very good question. He is certainly seen as a kingmaker, as the strong figure from the past that he got himself into right now. The issue that we have with the West is that we are not united. So the UK was very strong and fast in terms of supporting Ukraine, but we're so divided that this could be one of Putin's victories, that we're all over the place. We make deals with the Russians, we build gas pipelines, we are more dependent on Russia, and at the same time we're trying to tell them that they should move away their soldiers. What we ought to do is have very concrete, strong points that the Russians would fear, and they would understand that there is a certain red line that they should not be crossing. At the moment, we cannot even agree on the sanctions. We cannot agree on Nord Stream 2. Russians are laughing at some of the Western leaders. You may have heard the comment by the Russian ambassador to Stockholm, His Excellency Tatarintsev, who said they don't give a shit about sanctions.
Apologies for the language, but that was verbatim what was said.
I'm just quoting His Excellency Ambassador to Stockholm. So it shows you they are in a very strong mood, and they seem that they are winning. And we in the West, by having 10 different opinions, not sending 5,000 helmets to Ukraine when they almost maybe had some sort of a war, it makes us all look like a joke.
I mean, is it possible, actually, that what Putin's doing is just applying a pregnant pause? He's licked his finger, put it up to the air, tested what all the different European leaders in America are going to do if he does go into Ukraine, and might be thinking, well, I'm just going to hold my horses for the time being. Germany is potentially going down a route of concessions and appeasement. But it's interesting because it plays into this strange narrative that came out of the foreign ministry in Russia, who said that February the 15th, 2022 will go down in history as the day when Western war propaganda failed and that the West are humiliated and defeated without a single shot fired. So Russia here is almost portraying that this has been warmongering by the West for saying to Russia, well, you shouldn't be amassing all of these troops. Does that suggest to you that Putin is simply just putting his foot on the brake pedal and waiting for an excuse to like the blue touch paper?
Yes, it could be. That's a very good way to put it. And I think we've also fallen into the trap a little bit that Putin has set up for the West, meaning why exactly are the diplomats and embassies moving away from Kiev to Lviv and to the western part of Ukraine? Why exactly are they doing that? I spoke to Ukrainian officials. They said, please don't move away your diplomats. There is no war. There is a threat. But we've sort of allowed Putin to really play the game and set the rules for the game. So we're just waiting what will be his next move. That shouldn't be the position that we are in. It's not the NATO that amassed all those soldiers. It's Putin that has over 130,000 soldiers at the Ukraine, surrounding Ukraine at the moment. So it's the Ukrainians that are asking for help. And I think this is very important because I do understand how Russia says that they're being encircled as well and there is a threat to them. I mean, there is some sort of an argument there. But if you look at Ukraine, it's not NATO expanding and taking over Ukraine. It's the Ukrainian officials, all the governments, almost all the opposition, all the people are dreaming to be a part of NATO, to be closer to Europe. We should listen to them. It's an independent country.
If we find at the end of this that Germany gives themselves a pat on the back and says, look, we've been pulled away from the brink of disaster, we really shouldn't celebrate, should we? Because what would have essentially happened is Putin's been given carte blanche to act however he wants and get away with it.
Yes, and I think he likely will. And I think we should have a serious talk with our German partners about what exactly are they doing. Are they part of this sort of Western solidarity? Because if we were together and if there was that one voice towards Russia, we probably wouldn't have all this flexing muscles and seeing who's tougher. It's just very unnecessary. And honestly, people in Ukraine are scared. I heard many politicians that escaped Kiev right now. Mr. Zelensky stated at the conference yesterday that they have 24 hours to return to Kiev, otherwise they're not patriots. But people are terrified. You see the leader of Ukraine, when he was speaking, he was worried. So whether there is a real risk of war or not, we should do everything possible to prevent the conflict. And I think Germany should be in line with the rest of the Western leaders.
Yeah, I don't think we can write off the potential for a conflict still to break out. Lots of you have been emailing us about the Russia and Ukraine tensions today. So let's have a look at what some of you think. Mark says, I don't understand why is the West continually trying to talk Russia down. I feel like we're trying to push Russia for a fight as more Eastern European countries have joined NATO. Let's stop all of this and finally get Russia in our corner for once. I'm not sure Russia wants to be in anyone's corner, Mark. Bill says, why is everyone surprised by Germany and Russia's relationship? They've always been connected, in my view. Well, that is true. They have indeed. At one point, Eastern Germany was part of Russia. Michael says, apparently Germany has sent additional troops to bolster NATO, perhaps appeasing its allies too. Yeah, well, Germany is playing a very interesting game here, looking after their own interests, as well as somehow trying to marry those with the interests of NATO. Nada says, Germany don't want to lose their gas supplies, so I doubt they can do much. Well, there you go. That's what we've been saying all programme, isn't it? The appeasement that could well be on the cards. That's about all for now. Join me again tomorrow for We Need to Talk About on GB News. Same time, same place, 2 o'clock tomorrow. Coming up next, it's The Briefing. First of all, though, it's time for the weather forecast. I hope you have a lovely evening, and I'm looking forward to your company again. Bye-bye.
Hello. Some wet weather around today, and things are going to stay very lively with our weather through this week. A couple of storms on the way. Storm Dudley through Wednesday, and then Storm Eunice on Friday. Ahead of that, we've got this weather system bringing rain today, and then another low arrives tonight. The winds start to pick up, and then the next low, this is Storm Dudley arriving through Wednesday, mostly affecting the northern half of the UK. More on that in a moment. First of all, let's get back to today, because wet weather affecting East Anglia and the southeast. A soggy Tuesday here, but turning a bit brighter across the Midlands and Wales this afternoon with sunny spells. There will be showers across Scotland with some snow in those showers, mostly over the hills. Temperatures, well, single figures for most, but double digits across the south. Not feeling all that pleasant, though, with the rain across the southeast. That scoots away through this evening, and then it turns drier for a time before the next weather system brings rain across the country through this evening. Snow across Scotland, again, mostly over hills, above about 200 or 300 metres. There could be some snow building up through the night. That weather system's almost out of the way by Wednesday morning. It's a blustery day on Wednesday everywhere. And then the next batch of rain comes in from the west. And again, some of this rain is going to be heavy, and the winds continue to strengthen. Some good spells of sunshine across eastern England during Wednesday morning. But that next weather system, this is Storm Dudley. The winds really picking up across Northern Ireland, western Scotland through Wednesday afternoon, and then strengthening further through the evening across parts of Northern England also. So we do have warnings in place. An amber warning covering southern Scotland, the north coast of Northern Ireland and Northern England. Broader yellow warning in place as well. So this is Wednesday afternoon into the overnight period. That amber warning in place, and as Dudley clears away then through Thursday, another low arrives. This is Storm Eunice, which is likely to bring problems and disruption across the southern half of the UK on Friday. Bye for now.
Hi, I'm Alistair Stewart, and I really hope that you can join me here on GB News. I've been in this game for 40 years and I've made lots of friends, but I try and reflect what they think about the big stories of the day in conversation with me. That's why we call it Alistair Stewart and Friends. And you're a key part of it as well. I always get inundated with emails and messages and texts. And if they're really good, I play them back to you. 12 till 3 every Saturday and Sunday.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the